So when things get a little bit of engine trouble, something starts showing up, it's like batten down the hatches. That doesn't mean like going back to the elimination phase. It just means doing all the things that we know makes us feel good. And then when we're feeling great, it's like unfurl the sails, live a little, right? Like we're on vacation, like I'm going to try a little bit more gray area foods right now because I'm feeling it, And that's what life is about.
Living with autoimmunity doesn't mean settling for less. Inspired Living with Autoimmunity is the show for high achievers who want the energy and vitality to live fully, not just manage symptoms. With your host and autoimmune coach, Julie Howton. It's time to take your power back.
Mickey, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited for this conversation. And it's always divine timing because I have wanted to have you on the podcast for a long time. And now we get to talk about your new book, The New AIP. But first, for listeners who aren't familiar with you and your journey, can you share with us how you have become to be such an important voice in the autoimmune world?
Yeah, thank you. So 15 years ago, this all started for me when I went through my own autoimmune health crisis. So like a lot of people who come, to nutrition or cookbook writing and that kind of thing, we usually start with a personal mission and, that foundation of like why we got into this in the
Sure.
first place. For me, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's and celiac after, at the time it felt like that 18 months, 2 years of searching was just an excruciatingly long amount of time. I now know that many autoimmune patients
Right.
actually spend far longer. At the time I was 26, I was just so impatient and I had been going in to doctor. I think I saw 6 who told me that there was nothing wrong. I'm pretty sure, around Dr. 3, I got labeled as a hypochondriac.
Sure.
I was offered antidepressants and I just was sent on my way. And I started to have some pretty serious symptoms. So I had an MRI with some white matter lesions, which can be consistent with like multiple sclerosis. I had pleurisy, which is inflammation of the lining of the lungs. It's a connective tissue. So I kind of had some weird, serious symptoms in a couple different buckets. But because our medical system is so broken into different specialties, nobody really knew what to do with me. And because I looked like a healthy 26-year-old woman, they were kind of like, this is probably stress or anxiety. Let's just wait for 6 more months. So I kept persisting. I got this diagnosis of Hashimoto's and celiac with the explanation that even though I had autoimmune thyroid disease, there was no treatment necessary because my levels were normal, which is like so common for Hashimoto's patients.
Gosh.
And I was just told to eat a gluten-free diet and that hopefully everything would resolve. Of course it didn't. And so that's kind of what led me on the path to discovering AIP. At the time, it was like a side note, a sentence in some different research communities. So, there's the functional medicine community, there's the ancestral health community. They were both kind of coming up with this idea at the same time, which was basically maybe people with autoimmune disease should avoid certain foods. And so in the earliest days, that's what AIP or the Autoimmune Protocol was. And I dove in. I met a few other women at the time. Blogging was really popular. I know it's really hard to imagine now. This is like before Instagram. And, we all connected. We created a Facebook group of about 6 of us, all different conditions, psoriasis, multiple sclerosis, IBD, me with the Hashimoto's. And we all kind of saw a lot of improvement. And I think out of that is really where the AIP community grew. It's where then I started publishing recipes and writing cookbooks, and kind of the rest is history.
Amazing. And you were a personal chef before shifting over and going back and studying nutrition and this is exactly how it happens. You just like did it on steroids by helping create this protocol for everybody in a like really, repeatable fashion, and then going on to train coaches, myself included. Thank you. Is kind of like, we do something, it works, we want to share, right?
Yeah,
This is,
it's so organic. And like, honestly, Julie, back then, it was a list of foods. There was no transition. There was no, how long do we do this? Actually, I did it for about 9 months, which I definitely do not recommend now. You know, the official guidance is like 3 months tops. Back then, nobody knew what happened once you did elimination and felt better. What do you do next? You know, so reintroduction came later. All of that guidance came later. But, you know, the time that I did it, I just tried it. It changed my life. And I'm like, I'm just going to keep eating this way for a while, you know,
well, and
see what happens.
I did, and it wasn't AIP at the time, but I call it the throw spaghetti at the wall approach to healing was, and it is so common once you feel better to just hold in that small little protective pattern. And so I love that you highlighted, like, this is not supposed to be a forever thing. I want to kind of back up and do a little bit of myth busting, because you and I share similar pet peeves to some of the misconceptions out there. And then over the past 15 years, especially the past 10, there's been so much research. So I want to talk about that, because it seems like from the process of the research has come now the new AIP or the modified AIP as well. So I want to back up though, because the first myth I want to bust is that the Autoimmune Protocol is a diet. We already busted a lifelong diet, but it's not just a diet. And I don't know why. Like, that's the big takeaway people get is like, oh, it's a diet.
Yeah, I mean, this is amazing. So first of all, I love to call it a template. And I like to think of it as a process you move through. It is a long process. So it is something that, somebody needs to commit to 6 months to a year, realistically. If you're going to really see it through, you can probably do it in 3, but like 6 months is kind of minimum. So it's a process, but it's not something that, we're doing forever. And it, that really comes out of, I think, personalized nutrition. Like you and I have really studied deeply nutrition. We know that the best way to apply nutrition is by looking at each person and figuring out what works for them. So the Autoimmune Protocol is, for each individual person, a way that they can figure out what works for them, which is just so the opposite of modern dietary advice, right? Everybody wants to know, are eggs good for everybody? Is dairy good for everyone? Is gluten good for everyone? And the answer is, who are you? How is your immune system functioning? What kind of conditions are you managing? How does your body handle different fats? And, we all are just so unique. And so I love that you wanted to start here, because really, this is something that is not very marketable. It's why nobody has written a best-selling book on how to find your own perfect diet. It's just because that's a really hard sell. It sounds like work. And people don't really want to do work. They just want to be told what to do.
Yeah.
So,
I get all the time. I'm sure you do too. Like, well, what do you eat? And I'm like, well, that's
not going to help you.
That's not really for you. And so, and I will say too, I have noticed that often when people make a big diet change, especially if they're coming from standard American SAD diet, including processed foods, and they switch to a whole foods diet of any sort, they will feel better usually for a period of time. And so I think that is one of the, you hear like, oh, you need to go vegan. And I'm like, well, I'm not the right person to help you if you're vegan. I do truly believe, we heal. My tools include animal proteins and nutrient dense foods like that. And so, but you do hear like, well, I went vegan and I was better, I felt better for 6 months and then I got sicker, or vice versa. Carnivore is another one that I think can really help people as like a little bit of a reset. But like, nobody's supposed to just eat meat forever. Like, we're not created that way. So I think that is part of for the people that like are kind of plan hopping, and getting a little bit of relief and then not is, I think it's important for people to understand. And that is not what AIP is all about. And so, and what about what are some of the other things that are involved in the protocol beyond food? And then we're going to circle back to the food part.
Yeah. I love that you start here too, because AIP, and I know we'll talk some about the research, which is really important to know what was done in the studies, because when we talk about those results, which were really exciting, we have to remember that these participants were actually taking an approach to managing their sleep, to managing their stress, to connecting with other people.
Yes.
And all of these things, exercise, all of these things really profoundly impact somebody's autoimmune journey. Like our bodies are regenerating when we're sleeping. Stress really affects our symptoms. That connection piece, having support in our life. So not to make the process really overwhelming, but to just get people to think about those different areas and how they can incorporate them as they're also going through the dietary approach is really important. And so if we want the results, which I know we'll talk about later, consistent with what we've seen in the studies, which is about 3 out of 4 people see a meaningful improvement from doing AIP, we also have to remember that even in those studies, they were taking attention to those different lifestyle pieces, which is so important.
Thank you so much for highlighting that, because that is, for me, I think the biggest misconception or missed. And my goodness, it's in the literature, it's in your books, it's in the protocol. But I know that we just do tend to focus on the food piece. And in isolation, that's probably not going to give the results that people are looking for. So I do want to shift into the studies, because, oh my gosh, I remember when the first study was published, it was so exciting. We know in the functional medicine world that, sometimes a double-blind placebo study is not possible. And we see evidence well before the studies are published. So that being said, I am a geek and I am very science-based. And so it has been really exciting to see studies coming out and showing, there's literally nothing else that I'm aware of where you can actually say studies show 3 out of 4 people get remarkable, improvement from this. So walk us through a little bit of, because that didn't happen in a vacuum too. So, share with us about some of the studies.
Yeah, and thank you. This is my favorite thing to talk about, just because I think, personal experience and anecdotal experience and even clinical experience for those of us who've been working with clients over many years, that's so valuable. But then actually creating a science experiment where we take a bunch of humans with a, population that is kind of cohesive and then see what happens. So much has come out of that. And I actually think that's why the Autoimmune Protocol has really grown and matured and changed into something that is more accessible and useful, is just because we have all of this information. So I love talking about it. So the first study was done in IBD, and it was actually a set of studies. This is out of Scripps, San Diego, and they did a study with 19 patients having either Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. They were not newly diagnosed, so I think the mean disease duration was 19 years. So these people were pretty sick. They had failed conventional treatment. So this includes, your biologics, your steroids. They were in an active flare, different levels of medication. Some were not on medication. Some were on very powerful medications, but they all had this characteristic of just being in an active IBD flare, which, is bleeding and cramping and mucus and going to the bathroom 20 times a day. Very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
They did 6 weeks transition to the elimination phase and then 8 weeks elimination. And their outcome measures, depending on if they had Crohn's or UC, were the standard clinical indicators. So for one is the Harvey-Bradshaw Index, for the other is a partial Mayo score. And all this means is that these are research-determined indicators of clinical remission. They weren't just asking someone, do you feel better, right? Are you going to the bathroom less? They actually were going in with colonoscopy, taking pictures, visually inspecting the mucosa, which is really important because some research, we're going to talk about Hashimoto's, the only thing you can do is ask people about their symptoms, right? But with IBD, you can actually go in and have a visual inspection. So out of that study, 73% reached clinical remission in week 6, which actually rivals the best drugs that we have for IBD, including like the $80,000 a year biologics. So that was a really stunning result. All of the participants who were in clinical remission at week 6 maintained it for the duration of the study, including a few who they were told not to make any changes to their meds, but some of them were like, this is great. I'm going to wean off my steroid, right? Yeah. So they didn't listen, and they still continued that clinical remission through the remainder. So that study was kind of the one that started it all. They did a second study with quality of life. Of course, quality of life improves a lot when you're not going to the bathroom 20 times a day.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Right? And then they did a third, which was an intestinal RNA analysis, which is actually the very first study that's ever been done for any diet for ulcerative colitis. And so they had 4 UC patients where they actually had tissue samples from the before and the after. And the microbiome department at Scripps did a study on just that RNA. So basically that's genetic expression. And what they saw was genes for inflammation were downregulated, genes for regeneration and tissue repair were upregulated. Of course, this is like very experimental, but it shows us how something like a diet, which makes sense in IBD, like this is all going through the digestive tract.
Sure.
It's influencing the microbiome. The microbiome is really this modulator of the immune system. But to see what's actually happening in the tissue level is super exciting, because that's exactly, where it's all happening in IBD.
It is so exciting. And I have a lot of pet peeves when it comes to like autoimmune myths. And it is something, and I've shared it on the podcast before, it's still to this day. And this is where hopefully the studies are going to create bigger impact in the traditional Western medicine world. Because still to this day, people are told, even with Crohn's and UC, like they're told, oh, it doesn't matter what you eat. Take this drug, you're going to need the drug, and it's like, oh my God, it's your gut. How can it not?
Yeah.
Like, come on.
And the way I like to think of it, Julie, is, it's skin throughout your digestive tract.
Yeah.
And what would it feel like if you were giving yourself like contact dermatitis? We've all had this experience of going out in the garden or going in the woods, getting poison oak, having that really inflamed skin. That's what's happening on the inside when people are eating things that they're sensitive to and they have allergy. And so how can they say that doesn't make a difference? It obviously makes a really big difference.
I know.
So,
it's like, okay, logic doesn't apply. So hopefully the studies are going to help.
Exactly. Yeah. So that
you mentioned
that was a big turning point for the AIP research.
Huge. And I'm going to jump ahead, and then I want to talk about the Hashimoto's study as well. But I think what my understanding has been that it was from that process, even back from that first study, of like this kind of like, not everybody needs this full complex elimination to start to feel better. And so that's, for me, like the really exciting part is the studies are so important. And then the information that came out was like even better than one could hope, because I do think a lot of people that entertain the idea of AIP kind of get intimidated because it just seems too overwhelming when it does come to the food piece. That list can be really big. So was that kind of the beginning of like,
Yeah. And really, Julie, where we saw it in this study was week 6, they were not fully in the elimination phase yet. So to reach that clinical remission, and there was not one person who from week 6 to the 10-week end of the study entered clinical remission. So if that makes sense, everybody was there at week 6, which is the week before full elimination. So they had been taking out like 2 food groups, next week 2 food groups, next week 2 food groups, and they were taking out the biggest potential foods, so like gluten
Sure.
and dairy and eggs and nightshades right at the beginning. The end, they're taking out like nuts and seeds, you know, the foods that some people have sensitivities, but not
Yes.
everyone. Clearly, this group did not have, those were not the foods that made a difference for them. So you're right. That is kind of what started us thinking like, there's something that's actually like so powerful to this that maybe the whole thing isn't what everyone needs.
Yeah, which I love. And again, back to that bio individuality, right? Like we are all different. And some people do need, you know, to go all the way to the seeds. And I've worked with a lot of people who I use AIP, and you said template, I say framework, because often especially by the time somebody finds someone like me or like you, they've got so many food sensitivities because they've had leaky gut for so long, and it's to healthy, nutrient-dense foods. And so I tend to use testing and combine to help them get those results quicker, so that they can heal. But it does come back to, we are all unique. And like you said, like it can be, you know, somebody has been dealing with symptoms for 20 years, somebody is newly diagnosed, like we're just beautifully individual. So I love that. And I do think, again, because I am such a geek, like I love that this was the first study, and that you were able to get like physical evidence of healing from the colonoscopies and biopsies, because that's it is irrefutable. Yeah. And so, of course, I always say, like, I'll have people come to me and say, oh, I want to get off my meds like you did. And I'm like, well, my goal for you would be to feel your best, period. Like, there's no prize at the end of the game, right? For did you take meds? Didn't you take meds? And so when we talk about, that's something you do that with your doctor as you're feeling better, and then nobody should be just stopping their meds, for sure.
Yeah, you start with feeling good.
Yeah.
You start with feeling good. Then you feel good and you're like, well, then I can have a conversation.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk about, because it is so common and often, for those of us with multiple autoimmune diagnoses, which is unfortunately many of us, Hashimoto's, I feel like across the board, is so common. And similar to, I will say, your journey, while I know miserable and feeling like it was long at the time. I mean, I was quickly diagnosed with RA, but the Hashimoto's piece took years of me begging of like, I swear, I think something's wrong with my thyroid, which is the common, the finally, so subclinical, most people don't even get the diagnosis. And so, share with us a little bit about the results with the Hashimoto's cohort.
Yeah, so there have been 2 studies in Hashimoto's. So the first one was a functional medicine study by a doctor in Virginia, Dr. Rob Abbott. I was pretty involved in this, in the fundraising and the recruiting side of it, but really he wanted to do a study that was modeled after that IBD study. So again, 10 weeks, 6 weeks transition, couple months elimination. And then this time, because Hashimoto's is a disease that can cause symptoms in any organ and system in the body, that's because that's what your thyroid hormone does. It literally stimulates any cell to do whatever it's supposed to do. So if that's growing your hair, if that's like, firing some neurotransmitters and making you feel happy, if that is motility in your gut, that's why our symptoms are just so all across the board. Exactly. Our skin, it can cause so many problems, right? And the conventional treatment for Hashimoto's is hormone replacement therapy, thyroid hormone, which, they bring us to normal hormone levels, whether that's a functional range or a conventional range. I've seen research that says up to 60% of patients who are successfully treated, even to that functional range with hormones, express that they have symptoms that interfere with their daily life. So this is why when our hormone levels are normal, we are still tired, we are cold, we are losing our hair, our constipation is showing up. Like, we have lots of complaints, and that's because the medical system really does not have a good treatment. They know how to correct our hormones, but the hormones clearly do not tell us everything. So, as in contrast to IBD, where we have this clinical remission benchmark, you can go look at the tissue, right? Hashimoto's, we don't have that. We just have how many symptoms do you have?
How do you feel? Yeah.
Exactly. How do you feel? It makes it really challenging to study. So I just want to start by saying that is why the outcome for the Hashimoto studies are always symptom management and not hormones, because we know what happens when we can correct the hormones with medication, but that doesn't always make people feel better. So these patients felt so much better across the board. They used a couple different questionnaires. So again, for the nerds, sometimes questionnaires are validated. That means that it has been shown in research to align with how someone feels. Yeah. They also used an unvalidated questionnaire, which is a multiple symptom questionnaire, which if you've ever seen like a functional medicine doctor, there's lots of questions. It really tells your doctor or your provider how widespread your symptoms are in different organs and systems, but that isn't really used in a research setting. So I love this first study because the doctor used both, and both saw really good improvements, which really shows that the diet, even though their hormones stayed stable throughout, so these were people with euthyroid, meaning normal levels, they had a really big improvement in symptoms, in some cases up to 70% in specific symptoms, which was amazing. They also did blood tests, and they found that they had a 29% reduction in CRP as a group, which that's a marker of inflammation in the blood. So again, that is something a little more objective that we could look at. And they also saw a few participants throughout the course of the study needed less medication. Now, that wasn't really the outcome, but because the doctor was really trying to keep those hormone levels stable, some people started going a little hyper, and so he reduced their medication. And so that was just kind of one of those good things to know. Now, the second study is out of Poland, and it happened in 2022, published in 2023. I was not involved in this at all, but it was a dietitian-led team where they did a 3-month elimination, no transition. And what's interesting about this Polish team, how they did it, is they actually kept these participants on really pre-designed meal plans that were individualized to their size and their activity levels. They took a lot of measures of their dietary before and during so that they could actually compare. And they kept them on the exact same amount of energy density, which is interesting because they also took anthropometric changes. So they had people come into a clinic. This is the benefit of doing a non-virtual study. They had people come in, they did a DEXA scan, they took their weight on, the same scale. They did their labs, of course, and they also did a thyroid ultrasound. And what they found is that even though they were eating the same amount of energy density, so about 2,000 calories a day, not restricted at all, but they changed what they were eating. So they went from standard Polish diet to an AIP diet. They found that the average weight loss was about 8 pounds and 10% relative body fat. This is while their thyroid hormones stayed the same. And they also saw a reduction in thyroid volume and ultrasound. So they had their own questionnaire that they made up for symptoms. They saw a ton of symptom improvement, but I just thought that was such an interesting addition because thyroid patients and Hashimoto's patients often have this unexplained weight loss resistance that, their thyroid hormones are normal, but they're dieting, maybe they're exercising a lot, they can't lose weight. This is just such a common feature. It's just so interesting to see that, my theory is, of course, the inflammation just comes down so much when people are eating differently, that there's a different interaction between how that thyroid hormone works with their body, with their cells. That weight loss can happen without actually any restriction, which is something I've seen in my practice, but it's really cool to see that come through in a study.
That is amazing. And I love that they were, really able to do the DEXA and really just be really consistent across the board. And I'm so glad you said that. I was thinking that earlier about the lower thyroid hormone, or even the high, thyroid antibodies, they're a symptom, right? And so if you're not treating what was driving the inflammation, to me, it makes perfect sense that just having optimal, even if they're functional medicine, truly optimal thyroid hormone levels, well, you're not handling how did you get there to begin with. And that's when people end up, just continuing to collect other diagnoses as well, because that chronic inflammation is still there. So it's so exciting. I want to dig in a little bit to the new AIP. So I guess I should back up a little bit out of the amazing results from the studies, and seeing, like you said earlier, that people were getting results before they were on full elimination. And some people do I have clients that, that just they jump into the elimination, and they're not, doesn't align with their personalities to step toward elimination. But it's just so fun to see that so many people don't need that full complex elimination. Again, managing stress, optimizing sleep, movement. You mentioned, especially for people with hypothyroid or Hashimoto's, the exercise and thinking they're doing all the things they can to get that stubborn weight off. So often it's when I use the word usually movement instead of exercise. But so many people, and I was one of these people years ago, over exercise, and they're driving inflammation that way. So I like to say, optimizing movement, because sometimes it's actually taking it down a notch and not, you need to get up and move more. So that part we know, we're not throwing that part out. That's consistent. But because first step was the modified AIP, kind of came from those studies, and then you birthed a book. So
yeah. So really out of this, so it's been 15 years. I talked a little bit about the beginnings, which is 6 friends in a Facebook group and a couple sentences online, turned into this big community. And then the studies, which, we didn't even talk 2 weeks ago, there was an RA study that came out that showed about 3 out of every 3 out of every 4. So 77%, 77% had clinical improvement using the Rapid 3 questionnaire. And these are people with rheumatoid arthritis. 3 out of the 9, I think, reached clinical remission. So great results, actually very consistent with the other results there too. Yeah. So we're starting to have this body of evidence, and it's showing, again, people are getting results fairly quickly. And AIP does have this reputation for being hard. And those of us who have been coaching for a long time, in our practitioner training program, we started to teach modification. Here's when you might want to modify. Here's when you might have a client that this is just too hard. Here are the things that you modify. And so we decided to create a formal pathway in the elimination that's called the modified approach. And really that is a second pathway to the elimination phase that is still likely to achieve the same results. Now, again, we don't have research. I'm hoping at some point we have head-to-head core AIP and modified AIP in the same population, just so that we can see, with core AIP and IBD, we know it's 73%. If I had to guess, I would say modified AIP is probably 65%. You know what I mean? Right. My intuition is that it's close. Yeah. It's going to catch, some people who might still have some extra food sensitivities, but, the benefit to the people who need it to be accessible, affordable, easier to implement, they're just going to have a far better time actually managing their stress, managing their timeline, all of that. So the modified protocol, is different. So on core AIP, we remove grains, legumes, eggs, nuts, seeds, and nightshade family vegetables. And in modified, we include additionally, so rice, but not other grains. We include ghee, but not other dairy. We include legumes and pseudograins. So this includes beans, quinoa, buckwheat, that kind of thing, and then seeds, but not nuts. And there's a couple exceptions, like in the legumes category, we don't include soy and peanuts because those are highly allergenic and sensitive for a lot of people. So you kind of have to read those food lists. But really what it means is that on modified, you can now make that beautiful, nourishing pot of core AIP soup or stew with a side of rice or quinoa on the side, which, just going to give you, if you're an athlete like me, you've got an extra carb source. We know that rice for a lot of people, of course, there are people out there that are sensitive to rice, but in terms of grain, this is the hypoallergenic one, right?
Yes.
Those pseudo grains, they just have a different structure. They're actually seeds. They're not really causing a problem for a lot of people. And so everybody can benefit from that starting place that is just a little bit more eased. And then they can work on some of those other lifestyle pieces with a little more that juice that they have to actually make it happen,
Yeah, I love that. And you can always, if you're not getting the results you're looking for, you can always then, take what's the next step. And I was so excited. I am one, and I don't do super well with pseudo grains. But rice was like my most successful reintroduction back in the day. And especially women, which is, the majority of the autoimmune population, we need some carbs. Yeah. And so I was really excited. Again, I'm not a rule follower anyway. I already had rice back in my diet. And I am nightshade sensitive, but I still play a couple times a year. I check it because we're constantly turning over cells and healing and changing and growing. And sometimes it's forward progression. Sometimes it's backwards or sideways. But I'm always like, okay, how about now? Now can I reintroduce? I say I can dabble in nightshades. I won't eat them 2 days in a row. I don't eat them often. I make my choices, and so for listeners that are out there that have been eating the same way and not ever stepping out of that box to experiment. I'm not talking about like Oreos and like you, I also have celiac. So there are certain things that are, I will not ever do a gluten reintroduction, nor am I interested. I don't care. I don't miss gluten. So I love that. I was personally excited when I was like, oh, yay, other people can really, seem to do pretty well with rice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I love that you're basically talking about the gray area foods too, because really the whole point of this is to run your personal experiment to see what works for you. Right. And a lot of times what we discover is kind of like not a full-blown sensitivity, but like a threshold or quantity tolerance, which is so common. So if anybody listening gets the reintroduction phase and they're like, I thought I was just like, no, I have this list, black, white, yes, no. There's actually going to be a lot of foods in the middle that you're kind of like, I don't know what to do with this, you know?
I call them like your sometimes foods or your rarely foods, or which doesn't mean that, again, down the road, they may come back in. Yes. With certain exceptions. There are foods that we know are inflammatory across the board, like sugar, that I joke, I'm like, no, we're never doing a sugar reintroduction. You're going to get sugar out in the world. It's going to happen. Yeah. We're not going to be like
the microbiome shifts, like our cells, like our gut tissue. I mean, everything is just changing as we go through life. And I mean, right now I'm starting perimenopause, and I'm seeing a lot of changes just based on my hormones. And we know how estrogen is really a mediator of histamine response. This is how our bodies interact with food sensitivities. So even like the different time of the month, you can have different reactions to foods, different phase of life. If you are a woman and you're going to go through perimenopause or menopause, or, all of those things are going to affect your food reactions, whether or not, you're doing all the perfect right things, So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. I love that. So for many people, less restrictive, still getting results. And was this like the full impetus for you to write the new book? Because it has been a while and you have already, written books and contributed so much. But are you just wanting to get like the good information out there?
Yeah.
What inspired your new book?
Yeah. So Modified AIP was launched to the AIP certified coach practitioners in 2024 in January. So we basically consulted everybody. We consulted the researchers. We consulted, the people who have been practicing, and also, looking at research and not just AIP, but other food sensitivity, and kind of wanted to come up with a plan that felt robust, like another option that the providers could use with their patients and their clients, and then also launch that to the community and just like see what happened, right? Because that's how AIP started, it was this idea, a bunch of people tried it, and then all that feedback and everything grew out of that. So we kind of let that happen, and the feedback was just overwhelmingly positive. The practitioners love it. They were like, we've already been doing this with our clients.
Yep.
We've been finding so many people can't do the buy the book AIP. The researchers were like, yeah, we are really excited. And if we were to research this would be a great head to head. And so, 18 months ago, whenever I decided finally it was time, it had been about a year and a half of kind of letting that be out in the wild, I decided that the Autoimmune Protocol just needed a fully updated guide. And not just for the modified plan, but also the research has never been written about. Again, this is all just come out in the last 7 or 8 years. And so the big book about AIP came out in 2014, which I guess is 12 years ago now. It doesn't seem like it's been that much time. And then my last book that was really an AIP guide was 2017, which was really the first study didn't even make it in that book because of the publication time. So I really just wanted to create a resource that had all of the research in a way that people with brain fog could understand, just so that they have some motivation. And then a full guide to 3 phases. So the transition, the elimination, including both core and modified, the reintroduction with all the updated food lists and reintroduction stages, FAQs, and then also half of it's a cookbook. So core AIP, modified AIP, there's tons of recipes for anyone who just wants a one-stop shop to get started.
And again, that reminder that Mickey was a private chef before she entered this world. And I remember when I first found that out, I was like, oh, no wonder she can make these amazing, delicious recipes. Because for some of us, it would take a lot of work. And what I love is a lot of times, especially in the beginning, people want the things that feel like the foods that they're used to, whether it's, emotional foods or family traditions. And so I am so excited that you have more recipes coming out. We tend to cook so simply here because for listeners that haven't jumped into AIP, like your taste buds do change. And to me, like there's nothing better on veggies than good olive oil and some salt, right? But I still do understand that, and nor should we eat the same thing all the time anyway. And so I'm excited for new recipes because I'm not creative that way. I don't have the bandwidth. I'd rather take advantage of your expertise.
Well, I really love putting all of the recipes through this filter of, not using any weird kitchen tools. So if you've got like a sharp knife, a cutting board, a pot, a couple roasting dishes, you can make 95% of the recipes in the book because, I don't have time for like air fryers and pressure cookers. Like those are handy things if you're like a foodie and you like to experiment, but most people don't have them in their kitchens, right?
Yeah.
And I love prioritizing one pot, one pan, kind of throw it all together just because we have chronic illness, right? A lot of times we have low capacity for putting things together. So I just want everyone to know that this is, the food's going to taste great. You can serve it to people who eat anything. They're going to be happy. but you're not going to have to become, like a personal chef in order to feed yourself. I've really hopefully taken a lot of that work out, that you just can follow the instructions. Most of the recipes are 30 to 40 minutes, conception to putting it on the table. And they have ingredients that you can find at almost any grocery store year round. So nothing funny you have to buy online. It's just really, honestly,
which is so helpful, because there's nothing worse than like getting excited about a recipe or a dish, and then reading through and realizing like you have to go to 4 different specialty. Like I'm out, like I tap out immediately. Like, wow, that sounded delicious. But, I'm running
basic
a clinic.
Ingredients, right? And also like the price of groceries today, like, we gotta just be using what we can get our hands on, right? So
and you don't want to buy those ingredients where you're going to use like this tiny little bit of it in this one recipe, and I have no other way I don't know what else to use it with. So
exactly.
I love that you really are just keeping it real, like this is how people in real life succeed, in healing their symptoms, is because if it's not doable, then nobody's going to be consistent.
Yep.
Yeah. So I just love that. And I am so excited. So I started by like jumping in because I really wanted to bust this is just a diet myth. Are there other misconceptions or myths that you would like to address for listeners?
Yeah. The one big one is that doing the elimination phase longer doesn't yield better results. And you also don't have to be completely healed during elimination to move on to reintroductions. So 2 things, here. First is, 30 days is the minimum. And that's because in immunology research, we know that 3 weeks is kind of the minimum for the immune system to kind of clear that slate and really lower the inflammation. So we recommend a month just to make sure that you're past that milestone, right? And then that 3-month mark is really the point where I want anybody to be engaging a practitioner for some troubleshooting, because there are other things that could be going wrong. And I have met people who are like, I've been doing this for 2 and 3 years and I don't feel better. And I hate hearing that, because a lot of times, there are other influences. And so like I said before with the research, about 3 out of 4 people notice a benefit when they do the elimination phase. That's amazing. But that also means that 1 in 4 people, has something else that they need help with. So whether that's working with a practitioner, an AIP certified coach, that is definitely something I recommend. Maybe even going to your primary care if that's what you have access to, and asking for some lab work. There's so many different areas, with especially gut stuff that can be treated, that then makes it really hard for people to sustainably see improvement. So that's the thing that I would say is don't be doing AIP forever. It is something that works for a lot of people, doesn't work for some people. If it doesn't work for you, that is information. It doesn't mean you failed. You've learned something, right? You've learned,
and it doesn't mean it was useless.
Exactly. Hopefully you've learned how to cook, and a lot of this food is very nutrient dense, is very healing. It's not like you hurt yourself by doing it, but it is time to engage a practitioner, do some troubleshooting to kind of uncover that deepest layer of healing. A couple people in the IBD study, one of the things that, because I had a little behind the scenes, they had a couple patients that had like strictures, which is like a narrowing of the intestine. They were eating like tons of lettuce and like raw vegetables. And then they had adverse events because it cannot move through the digestive tract, because these are people that have like had surgery. So of course they, not only did they not feel better, they had an adverse event, they felt worse, they had to stop the study. These are the kind of things that personalize. Again, you need to kind of figure out how this is going to work in your physiology, which is why it's really important to like tell your doctor and potentially work with someone, because they can help assess you for, what you're doing. Actually, I think the RA study, one of the patients was eating a ton of cassava, like making like breads and AIP pastas. And like, of course that's compliant, but the team that wrote up the study was like, well, maybe they didn't see results because they were just eating all of this cassava, which some people in the AIP community actually report that that's a trigger for them.
They're sensitive.
So, that's what I would say about that kind of 3-month mark. troubleshooting is always frustrating to have to do, but it is a part of the process for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you are as passionate as I am about the don't just keep taking foods out. And that is such a big part of AIP. I do want to highlight, you just mentioned the nutrient density that is, intentionally built in for the foods that are included. I think there's this tendency for people to tell me what to avoid, tell me what to take out, tell me what to stop doing. And not enough people are asking the question, what do I need to be doing? What do I need to be eating? What do I need to be bringing in? What might my body be lacking that needs some extra support? So I love that you highlight that for us.
Julie, over the long term, so the healing that people experience in elimination is just this baseline that often gets better. So a lot of people think that even after they reintroduce foods, of course, it's going to be kind of this squiggly line. You reintroduce a food, you have a little setback because you have a reaction, but then you can reach your baseline again, and then you go up. Over time, you keep incorporating those foods that make you feel great. Perhaps the broth, perhaps all the fiber, perhaps the fermented foods, perhaps, if you're doing some organ meats or, slow cooked, stewed, lots of collagen, whatever it is that kind of helps you. I know that's my list, right?
Yeah, me too.
And as you continue to support your microbiome and eat in a way that is not causing you flares, your health might get better and better and better and better. Because that was my experience. And that was including foods that were way expanded from AIP. So I also don't want people to think that whatever happens during elimination, that's kind of, their new baseline.
Right.
Your new baseline can just keep going, right?
Yeah. I think of it as the foods you're taking out or you're pausing. You stop picking the scab, right? I literally think of it that way, but we still need to heal. So it's and you can't heal if you keep picking the scab. And so it's not all about what are we avoiding. I know you have shared, and I just mentioned before too, healing's not a straight path. And sometimes we do have setbacks or we experience the unexpected. And I know you have shared that you, in the recent past, also had some health struggles pop up, and I do feel I shouldn't put it on you. My experience has been when I have experienced similar things, there is this kind of, two things that I know I have experienced is one is almost like a PTSD reaction of when I get this kind of inflammatory response, I wake up with the joint pain or fatigue and it's, immediately my brain's oh, here we go, and I have to just, okay, no, talk yourself down. That's a pattern. But also for me personally too, was this oh my gosh, this is what I do for a living and I know what I do and I help other people do this and, and yet we still have setbacks sometimes. So would you be willing to share a little bit with listeners? Because I think it's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely, so in the last year, I've come to realize perimenopause. I started having uveitis, which is inflammation in the iris, which is a connective tissue symptom. Again, back to my story 15 years ago. I never really got a diagnosis of some of my muscle and joint. I had a lot of involvement at that time, kind of went away, but I have had psoriasis, which was misdiagnosed. And then this eye thing started happening and it started in one eye, went in the other eye. Of course, they were oh, maybe, it's autoimmune. Deep down, I'm of course, So I end up with a diagnosis of psoriatic arthritis, which, is a explanation for the psoriasis. Turns out the rash that I had been treating with my dermatologist she told me for sure wasn't psoriasis, is now actually psoriasis, the eye, and really figuring out that transient tendon, I actually don't have a lot of joint pain, but I do get some transient tendon pain. So I do have psoriatic arthritis now. And, that diagnosis has come literally 15 years later.
Wow. Which is amazing.
So I went through this period last year when I was up against the deadline. trying to turn in this book, which is obviously a trigger, stress. Yeah, looking at the computer, looking at the camera. I was actually doing the photography for the book. And the thing that I really honed in on was like, I know what to do here. I know what my body needs. I know what to prioritize. I know that I took a whole pause from the work and I just took care of, nourishing my body with the foods that I know make me feel the best. Getting back on some of my supplement routine for really deep healing that I know is like deeply supportive, and just waiting and being at peace with waiting, knowing that like I have been here before. I've had so many challenges. I've had so many days that were hard. Of course, that time it was a little hard because it was my eye. And so I had to have my eye dilated and I kind of couldn't see very well. Yeah. But I didn't have any pain, which was new to me. It felt very like exciting. Psychological. Yeah. I'm like, wow, okay, this is weird. But it was a really good lesson for me in just really finding my inner why, and just realizing that like I still live with chronic illness and it's going to come back sometime in my life.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing. Like we're human too, right? Like I run 2 businesses. And so there are times I joke like all of this hair is gray and this hair is brown. It's been like quite the past 18 months for me as well. And so it's not about perfection. Perfection is probably one of the things that drove you to autoimmunity to begin with. And all of us need to take stock sometimes. And often when we've got big stuff going on, it does take our body reminding us like, hey, you need to dial this in a little bit or up level here. And so the things I was doing 5 years ago, I do hold a lot of my lifestyle stuff. Some of it like, no, I know, the sleep and the, stress management and the food, like I do protect, but in general, sometimes I'm like, oh, I need to kind of just reel this back in or, oh my gosh, I was short on sleep 2 nights in a row. I know if I, don't prioritize that right now, like I know where that road goes for me. Mm-hmm. And so I really appreciate you always showing up and sharing genuinely of like, we're all human. We're all in this together. And we sometimes need to course correct or adjust.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you explained it beautifully, Julie, batten down the hatches. So when things get a little bit of engine trouble, something starts showing up, it's like batten down the hatches. That doesn't mean like going back to the elimination phase. It just means doing all the things that we know makes us feel good. Yeah. And then when we're feeling great, it's like unfurl the sails, live a little, right? Like we're on vacation, like I'm going to try a little bit more gray area foods right now because I'm feeling it,
Exactly.
And that's what life is about. Sometimes we need those low points to really develop that deep gratitude and perspective on healing, and realizing that it's not all guaranteed, that we can do all the right things. Sometimes things don't change. And, we have to notice and really enjoy the times when things are good and realize that perfect health is not required for enjoyment in a lot of situations also. So
absolutely. And nor is, perfect protocol. Because I love, it is true. Sometimes we have to reel it in. Sometimes we can have a little more fun, which I think is so important for people to understand. So we're past the point of the conversation where people are leaning in because they want to hear Mickey's number 1 step that they can take starting today to support their wellness.
All right. So my number 1 step for you today is try some fermented foods. Ooh. I would say we're all hearing about it, but if there's one thing that really can help your microbiome, it's a little fermented foods. And if you don't like the things that everybody already knows about, like sauerkraut, try like some ginger fermented carrots, maybe try a little fizzy, like a kombucha or a water kefir, and let us know how it goes.
I love that. And so by the time this airs, should be right around when the book is out. So if it's not out when this episode drops, it is almost out. The new Autoimmune Protocol and Amazon, all the bookie places
everywhere. Yep, and worldwide on Kindle. So thank you so much.
Love it. I would say do both. I love having like especially for recipes and things like that too. But also just to add to my collection of your books. So I like having them on the shelf and as a resource. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, but also just for continuing on your journey of bringing the science to people and really trying to just solidify the knowledge and help people simpler than they think start to feel better. And especially for those of us with autoimmunity, I honestly think like anybody, even people who don't, I see so many people that are so inflamed, but they don't have autoimmunity yet. So it is interesting that I think anybody who does AIP is going to feel better. Yeah. So
we could do a study of the partners and adjacent people who feel so much better. I've got one in my house for sure.
It's so true. It is so true. So thank you so very much, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Julie. You too. Thanks for how you show up for this community. It really matters a lot.
Thank you. For everyone listening, remember you can get the show notes and and I'm going to back it up because where's the best place to find more Mickey aside from the book?
Oh, yeah. So I'm on all the social media at Mickey Trescott. And I also have a new website called the Autoimmuneprotocol.com that has all the details on AIP if you need a reference.
Love it. Mickey, thank you. And you can get those links, transcripts, and show notes by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Go get the new book, The New Autoimmune Protocol.
Thanks for tuning in to Inspired Living with Autoimmunity, hosted by Julie Howton, your autoimmune coach. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone in your life who needs to hear it. For the complete show notes, links, transcripts, and everything discussed today, visit inspiredliving.show. You can also send in your questions there to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Remember, it's time to take your power back.